Hi everyone! Glad to see you again on my channel. Thank you for following me. If you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Now let's get into it. Our first story today is, sometimes getting scammed is just the beginning of a beautiful plan. I got scammed last week by a guy on Craigslist. He sold me what I thought was a good working washing machine. He stayed with me for the first 5 minutes to make sure it worked well enough before I paid him $400 cash. Then it stopped halfway through the rinse cycle. The thing didn't work. So I message him, "Hey, this washer isn't working. What gives?" I look up videos and spend 2 hours trying to fix it myself. The machine is a piece of garbage. No response. I'm pissed that I got scammed. But then I find more of his Craigslist postings. This guy must have a warehouse of broken appliances waiting to scam people with. I send him an email on one of my burner email accounts asking if he can deliver 2 hunky old dryers to me. "I'll pay extra." He responds immediately. I tell him I'm about 40 miles away. "Can he do it?" "Absolutely." I tell him to meet me in a lot at 3 p.m. peak rush hour. The next day goes by and he asks if we're still on. "Yeah." 2:50 p.m. rolls along and he says he's almost there. I tell him I'm running late. I get an email around 3:10 p.m. "Where are you?" I tell him, "I'm so sorry. The traffic is terrible. I'm about 20 minutes out." 3:35 p.m. "Almost here?" I say I'm so sorry again. I ask if he can pull the big ol' hunky dryers out of his car so we can load them up faster. I'm almost there. He says he will. 3:45 p.m. Here yet? His messages kept coming in. He sent me one last sweet note around 4:30 p.m. saying he was leaving now, thanks for wasting his time. Heading back into the sweet traffic. I lost $400, but man, it felt good to waste a scammer's time. Scammers count on you feeling helpless, so sometimes turning the tables is the only satisfaction you'll get. Just remember, $400 is still gone. Have you ever gotten creative revenge on someone who wronged you? Now let's move on to story 2. My neighbor tried to make my life miserable and accidentally destroyed himself in the process. We bought our house 4 years ago. During the showing, inspections, appraisal, and approval by the city, no one said anything about the neighbor's fence that spanned from the front right corner of his house across his driveway with a gate to the front left corner of my house. This effectively blocked me from accessing a 30-foot by 4-foot strip of my own property. It was all grass that he mowed. Later that year in November, I noticed a tiny bit of water seeping into the basement on that side of the house. A quick look at that side showed a slight slope towards my house. I planned to hire someone in the spring to slope it away and install a French drain so I didn't flood his driveway like a good neighbor. The next spring, I hired the crew. The neighbor, a 60-something-year-old who looks 80 according to my wife, came out screaming at these guys. They blew it off and thought he had been day drinking. They sloped, tilled, mulched, and left a nice flower bed. The next year, I planted some roses and hired a company to do a yard clean-out. They got to that side to pull weeds, and the old man came screaming out again. He even took a half-hearted punch at one of the guys. He called me a word I won't repeat over and over again. I told them to ignore that side. My wife and I agreed. If he wants to be a dick, we'll just let it overgrow so we can look at it. Weeds were 4 feet tall by end of summer. This spring, he came over the fence, got in my face, and asked when I was going to clean this up. I said, "When I have assurances, you won't harass me or workers." He started calling me names again. I said, "Call the city," and ignored him. The next day, code enforcement knocked on my door. He called. The officer said he saw no weeds, and I had a nice home. We went to the side of the house. Code enforcement saw his fence blocking my access. "Well, nothing I can do to you, but he has 10 days to remove that fence. He also needs to weed his patio and edge the sidewalk." The next morning, his wife came over and asked if I would split the cost of removing the fence. I said, "Sorry, but us bitches are out of charity money this week." Now there's an old man sweating in the heat, removing the fence he built, calling his kids to come help because their old man couldn't keep his mouth shut. Sometimes the best revenge is just patience and letting someone's own aggression work against them. Have you ever had a neighbor who ended up creating their own karma? All right, story 3. Sometimes a seller thinks they're clever. They're not. I ordered a book on eBay. It was a good price and brand new. It arrived and I immediately took note of the diminished size. It was less than a quarter of the size of a normal paperback. The measurements were not in the description, and nowhere did it state that this book was a miniature version. The seller was a professional bookseller, as he had 20 more of the same version for sale. It was obviously deceit on his part. I messaged him that I would need to return my purchase, as I have a progressive eye disease that would not allow me to read the tiny print. I also pointed out that he should have mentioned the obvious and felt he should pay for return postage due to his misleading description. I was ill-prepared for his response. He snarkily told me that I should have asked what size the book was, and that a book is a book. He did offer to have UPS pick up the book on his dime and refund me when he received it, but only if I agreed not to leave negative feedback. So I packaged it up and let him know it was ready for pickup. A box is a box. This one just so happened to have a large chandelier in it at one time and measures about 4 feet by 4 feet. He should have asked me what size box I was shipping it back in. I would hate to see his UPS bill. When sellers try to dodge accountability, sometimes the best response is to follow their own logic to its natural conclusion. That chandelier box was pure justice. What's the pettiest comeback you've ever pulled off? All right, story 4. Sometimes the worst guy at the party ends up getting exactly what he deserves. One day, back in the 70s, I was attending a rock festival held in a sun-blasted farmer's field in southwestern Ontario. The weather was great, the bands were adequate, and we were mostly having a good time. One participant, however, was failing to endear himself to his fellow festival-goers. He was sloppy drunk, stumbling around in the crowd, falling all over people's blankets and belongings, hitting on other guys' girlfriends, and offering to start fights. People were getting right fed up with his act. After a time, he had to get rid of some of the beer he'd been taking aboard, so we headed over to the line of porta-potties. What this guy was too drunk to notice was that a small, self-appointed group of disgruntled participants followed him over. We watched him wait in line for an available unit and noted which one he entered. We gave him a minute or two to get settled. When the moment seemed ripe, one guy stepped to the front and held the door closed, while the rest of us nipped around the back and tipped the entire porta-potty over on its face. The tank was full enough that some of it splashed out and cascaded down his back, but with the unit lying door downwards, he was trapped. He had to lie there with his pants around his ankles yelling until security came and got him out. I sure hope there was a hose somewhere on that site. When you're out in public, how you treat strangers sets the tone for your whole experience. Nobody wants to be the person who ruins everyone else's good time. Have you ever witnessed instant karma hit someone who totally deserved it? All right, story 5. Some people spend a lifetime getting away with things until their kid finally gets one small, beautiful chance to return the favor. My fiancé grew up with barely any contact with his dad. Dad didn't pay child support, and fiancé had to jump from home to home with his mom. In his 30s, he reached out to his dad, who lives across the country, trying to build a relationship. I listened to countless phone calls of dad verbally abusing and gaslighting fiancé. Dad's father passes away, and dad puts dad's mom in a nursing home. We visit fiancé's grandma and find out she's been on a liquid diet for a couple of months because dad didn't provide her dentures. We locate the dentures and get them to her. She passes away, and fiancé inherits grandparents' portion of the business. Turns out dad has a gambling addiction. Over the course of 40 years, dad has gambled away countless millions. Fiancé had to sink thousands of dollars of his own money plus take out loans to pay off gambling debts. Fast forward to this weekend, fiancé flies dad out so we can go on vacation where dad covers the hotel. Amazing hotel, amazing trip. But fiancé chose the seats for both flights. Dad had an okay aisle seat coming here. On the way back, fiancé booked a middle seat for the 5-hour flight. Dad called afterwards saying he was sat next to a very large man and couldn't move the entire flight. Part of me feels bad for dad, but I'm happy to see my fiancé cackling. Sometimes the smallest power move carries the weight of a lifetime of hurt. Finding humor and harmless petty revenge can actually be part of healing. Have you ever gotten quiet satisfaction from a tiny act like this? Now let's move on to story 6. Sleep deprivation will make you creative real fast. I rented the ground level apartment in my friend's split level for a few years. The guys who rented upstairs owned a party lighting company and usually came home from work around 3 a.m. I worked a 9-to-5 job and I'm a fairly light sleeper. When they came home, they'd occasionally turn on the TV fairly loud, which would wake me up, but most of the time I could drown it out with a fan. This was annoying but manageable until one of their girlfriends moved in. This woman had no problem turning up the volume on the TV all the way, in the middle of the night every night and watching for hours. When I knocked on the door to ask them to turn it down, I was told this is when we get home from work and we'll do what we want. Even having my friend, their landlord, intervene had no effect. A few nights of 1 or 2 hours sleep turned me ingenious. I remembered that once, while microwaving my dinner, I started vacuuming and having both appliances on tripped the circuit breaker. I crossed my fingers that we were on the same circuit. During the next 3 a.m. showing of Willy Wonka, with the girlfriend screaming, "I love this movie," and turning the volume up even louder, I turned on the microwave and the vacuum. 5 seconds and poof, blessed silence. They reset the circuit breaker and the TV came back on. I waited a minute before turning on the microwave and vacuum again. Poof, silence again. This time, there was no more TV. My friend later told me they complained about the power going out because the TV was expensive and it could damage the electronics. I told him if they kept the volume to a respectful level, I wouldn't have to do anything about it. But I wouldn't hesitate if it happened again. The trick was only necessary a couple more times before they got the hint. When neighbors won't respect reasonable boundaries, sometimes you have to get creative with the tools you already have. Have you ever had to find an unexpected solution to deal with a difficult neighbor? Now, let's move on to story 7. Some interviewers forget that the internet has a very long memory. A few years back, I had an interview with the CEO of a small company. He kept me waiting an hour, was super rude, hadn't read my resume before meeting me, asked me questions not at all pertinent to the role, and tried to get personal info on former coworkers. All this in an interview which lasted about 10 minutes, after which I walked out. When I discovered Glassdoor, I found this company's page and learned that he was universally hated by everyone who had met him. Interestingly, His company had a Wikipedia page, which he had clearly created himself, as it originally read like a marketing brochure. Editors kept removing biased information from the page, and eventually it was whittled down to basically just a stub saying, "This company exists." It had a notability tag applied, saying the page really didn't meet Wikipedia's criteria for inclusion. Well, I didn't want it kept around, so I applied the proposed deletion tag to it, which if no one objects or edits the page within 7 days, leads to the page being deleted. Surprise, surprise, no one objected or edited the page, and 7 days later, the page was deleted. I experienced a small frisson of delight seeing the page gone. How an interviewer treats candidates reveals exactly how they'll treat employees, so trust those red flags early. Have you ever dodged a bullet by walking out of a bad interview? That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed these stories. I'll see you in the next one. Please comment, subscribe, and like if you enjoyed this video. It would help my channel very, very much. See